Good morning. Welcome to another Coffee and Dev, where we have our coffee, but there's not actually coffee in it because we already drank the coffee. But we grow as developers and the time it takes roughly to have our coffee. And I do this every Wednesday and Friday. And today is no different. And we are covering colo and on-premise versus cloud. So I think this is something that is interesting because a lot of people are starting the career now, or they are simply younger, or they're earlier in their journey. So if you start in like the last, I don't know, we'll say 5 years, the cloud's kind of in the default, the no-brainer, and you're like, who still has data centers, right? But there are times when we should have these. And I think it is worthwhile realizing that the cloud doesn't solve all your problems. The cloud has drawbacks itself, and it's not always a win-win. So there are times where the cloud is clearly the winner, and there's times when colo is clearly the winner. So I have done a much more detailed video. I think it was about 1.5 years ago. I cover all the considerations if you're going to consider doing colo versus going to the cloud, what would be required, everything from how you would build out your storage, the examples of what you would do, thinking about ampage per rack, how to rack, like all the different things that go around dealing with physical goods, drive failures, storage drive failure, all these considerations that most of us never even have to think about. So the video is on the YouTube channel for Tech at Scale, and it's, I think, about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, if I recall correctly. And that will go much more detail than we are today. But today, in today's world, when to reconsider the cloud. So when should we consider colo maybe? And the easiest thing you will start to consider colo, or at least the edge of your network, is on large egress bandwidth. So a lot of traffic going out of your cloud. Let's say you're hosting some sort of application that does, like Twitter is a good example, or even TikTok, and you're on some sort of cloud provider, and they're relatively all the same on the pricing and whatnot. Some cheaper than others, but like at the end of the day, it's not that crazy from each other. And you have all this, so a lot of content coming in, and most of the time ingress is free, no problem. You ship your data in, you don't pay the bandwidth. So this is great. But the problem is something like TikTok. What do we do when we have a lot of egress out? Because people are viewing all those videos, and now we're paying per gigabyte of this cost. Well, colo is not so bad because we can pay for like 95th tile billing, and which basically means to take the bottom 5% off and the top 5% off our bill, and then we get paid for the average. And we're also not paying for the usage, we're paying for the capacity. So instead of paying per gigabyte of bandwidth usage, we are paying for the pipe capacity. So we will be given like 100 megabits. So we can't go beyond 100 megabits, but we pay a flat rate per megabit to get the 100 megabits. So, it depends on the pricing and everything. But there is definitely a spot where it makes sense to start running the edge of your network or your CDN or the entire business off the cloud. The famous example is, as much as everyone thinks that Netflix is 100% on AWS only, which is true from the perspective of a lot of the compute and data lake that they have and the content storage itself. But the actual CDN is called Open Connect, and this doesn't live on the AWS side. They actually deploy these giant, I think it's 100 terabytes the last time I read the spec, boxes that can be racked in the internet exchanges or directly at ISPs, so that you can basically peer, so you can have connectivity between the ISP and these boxes. And when you load House of Cards, you go from your house through your ISP to like the local POP, and maybe then to the interexchange where your ISP is there, and then you don't have to go all the way to Amazon to get that video. What happens is your ISP goes, hey, I'm looking for House of Cards. And it's like, oh, there's a Netflix box right here in the data center where I am. Hey, do you have House of Cards? Yes, great, give me the content. So then they don't have to pay for that the egress out of AWS because you never actually made the request into AWS to ask for House of Cards. So this is a very good example of, as you scale, you could have a hybrid. That is one thing. But there are certain things that are very less costing to do on Colo than you would think. I used to work with a company that was quite large and bandwidth consumer. It was in the top 20, 25 in the world when you remove like dumb pipe providers, which are another way of saying like CDNs for the most part. Basically, companies that you will pay and they're serving the bandwidth on your behalf. It's not actually their content. So, of course, they're going to look artificially higher than everyone else. Well, it's not even artificial. They are producing more bandwidth higher than everyone else. The difference is it's because they're an aggregate of content for everyone. So the example would be like the Akamines of the world, the Cloudflares, the Fastly, right? It's not their content. It is they are hosting that content and providing it out. If you remove them, then yeah, the company I worked at is in the top 25 in the world. And the cost when we looked at different cloud providers was just astronomical. Like it was more than our entire bill for running everything in the company was going to be. And obviously that is why that was done on bare metal and Colo facilities, where we could control that and have billing arrangements with different ISPs to actually just commit and pay for the pipe and not pay for our usage through the pipe. So I have never, with all the places that I've dealt with and clients and everything, it is a very hard sell to say that you should not be on the cloud if your spend is below $500K a month. It is extremely hard to justify it, just because to be at that spend greater than $500K a month would be the spot where it works into my next point, which is talent. You need to have the expertise to be able to do this in-house. So doing Colo or a hybrid of Colo and cloud, you definitely need more support. You are the support. There's no open up support chat with AWS and be like, hey, this rack is not working how I thought it should. What's the issue? Or this network visibility is not working how it normally does. It all falls on you. So I think around the $500K a month mark is where you could start considering if you have a significant cost on a couple different things, such as like egress, or mostly the egress, specialized work, GPUs, or if you have really low latency requirements around SSDs. They're quite pricey at some of the cloud providers, but you're also not paying for the wear and tear, and you're not paying for maintenance. Like that is just, well, on Colo you are, because you have to replace it. On the cloud you are paying for it, but it's indirect. It's not like the SSD on your EC2 instance dies and Amazon shows up hitting you up for like, hey, you were unfortunate that the SSD on your EC2 instance died, so you have to fork out the money. You're like, no, I already paid that on the hourly rate, and that's just bundled in, and it's all abstracted from you. That's the beauty of the cloud, right? So in today's world, why not to use Colo? Well, for sure, if you have just like very elastic, high compute, and low egress out of where you're running, then probably you're not going to end up in Colo. The only time I see this is if you had very particular, like I had said just before, particular needs. You needed low latency or all SSDs, or you were probably on a lot of GPUs, And even the GPUs is like in the longer run, it can be cheaper, but the capital to do it is quite expensive. So it would go back to my other point of you'd have to be spending over 500K a month to have the significant spend to justify it. So hyper growth company, you probably don't want to be in colo. Hasn't been done, yes, but it's going to really slow you down more than you probably think you can. Just because you have to think about it. Every time you have 1,000 users and you 10x. On Amazon, it's a click of a button. From 10,000 to 100,000, it's click a button. You can just ask for the more instances you need. When you're colo, you have to actually buy and wait and rack. Like if there's a chip shortage and they're like, sorry, the new servers aren't going to be there for an extra 3 weeks, like that's on you. Like too bad, so sad. Like, so lack of in-house expertise is it's all kind of tied in. It's like if your spend is not greater than 500K a month on your cloud bills, then you're probably not going to be large enough to actually be able to support doing colo, and then you're not going to have the in-house experience. So you should just bank on the cloud and pay for it through the hourly. And once you have significant spend at the cloud providers, you should be considering picking up their support, their enterprise support, because that will give you access to basically slots of time with them to go over things like architecture, design, best practice, etc. And this is typically cheaper than you having someone in-house for that, especially if it's cross roles. Like the nice thing with the cloud providers is I can reach out and they can be like, oh, internally, let us look for someone who's an expert in X. And they'll bring that person to the meeting. In a company, if you had this colo, either you're paying consultant to do this, or your in-house is going to spend, your dev or your DevOps or your SRE is going to spend a significant amount of time training, reading, and getting to the point where they're able to actually make a call on that. And that takes away from other priorities in the company. So cloud is nice where you can seamlessly just spend money to accelerate everything. It allows you to control velocity. So I will say that, the inverse of this is if you don't have necessarily a hyper growth company, or you have a very predictable growth company, so you have a 10 or 20% year over year kind of growth company, and all your traffic and compute and everything looks like nice, pretty predictable bell curves, then colo is probably a spot to maybe consider. Also, assuming you check off all the other boxes with the spend and you have the expertise, you're a big enough company where you would be able to make a team around this. So that's my little summary. I will say that probably 95, 99% of you, somewhere in that range, should just be cloud and do not consider yourself a unicorn. A very small percentage of you are at companies that honestly should reconsider some of their situation of being on the cloud and move more towards cloud agnostic. So you're able to move to different clouds based off the different pricing and needs of what each cloud provider would allow you, but also to start taking the steps to have the option to look at moving entirely out of them. There are still a couple spots, like I listed off, 3 spots that if you fall in those 3 categories of high egress, significant amount of GPU costs, or low latency where you're buying hardware that is, I think, overpriced for what the cloud providers get it at their volume discounts, so things like SSDs, then you could have a spot where you're probably going to end up a hybrid, which is some component there is going to be bare metal colo, and the rest will be on the cloud where you're able to take advantage of everything else that provides us. Elasticity, on demand, spot instances, the fact that you get new instances as time changes, the pricings typically decrease over time. With that said, I want to mention that usually every Sunday I do a fireside chat with a guest. Right now, it's just a wonderful fellow named Andre who comes in and talks to me about all things tech related. But I am looking for other people so that we can give poor Andre a break. If you would like to come on, just talk about
anything you want in terms of related tech things. Maybe it's hiring, maybe it's being a manager, maybe it's development practices, maybe you want to talk about how you grew from a junior to intermediate. I am always open. There is the email. And if you want more content like this, I occasionally stream on Twitch. And mostly you'll find most of this content on YouTube. And check it out. And until Friday or next time I see you, keep drinking your coffee and keep learning. Later.